Hello, all you amazing women, and welcome to How to Feel Like a Midlife Goddess. With me, Amanda Ryder, nutritionist and author. Now, I call this podcast How to Feel Like a Midlife Goddess because, let's face it, so many of us don't feel like shining in midlife. We can be grappling with physical and psychological symptoms, which can lead to a real loss of confidence, and it can feel like you're really losing your identity. However, I believe it's possible for us all to feel good at this time of our lives. So each week, I'm going to be sharing with you my best nutrition and lifestyle advice, as well as interviewing expert speakers. And week by week, together, we will build upon a foundation of healthy, sustainable habits that will really benefit us and make all the difference to how we feel. So stay tuned, because this is your recipe for thriving at midlife and bringing out your inner goddess. Today, Henny Flynn has joined us on the podcast, and I know you're just going to really get a lot out of what she has to say. Henny is a coach, author, podcaster, writer. In fact, she has published 4 books, including In the Flow and My Darling Girls. She's also a coach, a public speaker, and you'll even find her meditations on Insight Timer, which is an excellent meditation app if you haven't already heard of it. And you're probably wondering what she does coach, and I'm going to let her tell you that in her own words. But just to give you a flavour of this conversation, I can tell you that Henny is all about helping us discover our clarity, our calm, and our confidence. So yes, please to that. And helping us to have self-compassion with ourselves, which, as we know, can be difficult when you've allowed inner critic to deal with. And she's going to help us deepen our self-awareness so that we can make changes that will better serve us. So that's a lot, Henny. But hi, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, hi, Amanda. And how lovely that we finally managed to make our collective energies sync together so that we could be here together in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had to postpone this meeting a few times, but we're here now. Brilliant. So Henny, to start with, can you tell us a bit more about what you currently do and what brought you to this work? And it's a big question, but I'm going to shut up now and let you just explain.
Okay. So gosh, there's so many starting points, but I suppose if I begin with the work that I offer now, I think the best way I have of describing my work is as a therapeutic coach. And it took me a long time to understand that that is really what I am and what I offer. And essentially what it means is that for many people, many people, there can be a bit of a gap between traditional therapy and what we might ordinarily imagine to be coaching. And I now finally see that what I do is I offer a bridge between those two ways of doing this self-inquiry and this sort of, expanding our inner awareness of who we are and what it is that we want to move towards. And so I kind of sit in this liminal space between therapy and coaching, hence therapeutic coach. And a lot of my training is based around this space. Now, as a coach, I can operate all the way along the spectrum from this therapeutic end all the way up to, consulting, which reflects the years that I spent working in big corporates. So I spent 20 odd years working in financial services. And what led me to do this work is that as part of my experience of being in those spaces, I went through a really significant burnout. And in 2016, almost died. I had such limited self-care, such limited self-awareness, really, that what I hadn't noticed was that I knew the job was big, and I knew it was getting bigger. What I hadn't understood was that I was using it as a distraction technique from a whole load of other stuff that was going on in my life that I was finding really hard. So my mother had died the previous year. Um, I was experiencing early menopause. I'd been to the doctor, been told I was far too young. And so I just thought I was going mad, which I think is a experience that an awful lot of women have. And so in this kind of this fear that I would be sort of exposed in some way for not coping, I worked even harder. And in 2016, I had pneumonia 3 times. And the third bout, I also got sepsis and had another virus that was trying to shut down all my internal organs. So, and if I hadn't made it to hospital that night, so thank goodness for the nurse in the local doctor's surgery who overrode the doctor and said, get her to hospital now, to my husband. And God bless him, her, everybody who dealt with me after that, because if I hadn't made it there that night, I wouldn't have woken up in the morning.
Gosh.
So that's what led me to this work, was this deep realization that not listening to myself, not paying attention to myself, um, was almost the ultimate catastrophe, for
Gosh,
me
yeah.
anyway.
What had led up to that, Henny?
So I think, like many people, I had spent years and years really not paying attention to myself. Now that what I thought was paying attention to myself was more likely to be some kind of distraction tactic. So I'd call resting, lying for hours in front of the TV. I'd call recreation, fun, drinking too much. I'd call having a hot bath like the ultimate luxury, and actually, like, those things, having a drink. I don't drink now, but having a glass of alcohol, that's okay if that's okay for you. Uh, lying on a sofa and watching a film, that's okay if that's okay for you. Having a hot bath can be the most wonderful thing, but not understanding what the drivers were that were um, taking me towards those behaviors meant that I really wasn't listening to what was inside me, which was, I'm really unhappy. I'm not, I'm not doing the work that I really feel I'm here to do. I'm in some way not authentically showing up, and also not paying attention to the fact that I was not only grieving my mother, but also undergoing this enormous change in my body, which I was just ignoring. I mean, ignoring. And I think that ultimately everything sort of came together, thank goodness, and said, right, you haven't listened so far. So we're going to really make sure that you listen this time. And I think the other thing as well, Amanda, is that I've had 2 other burnouts. So
This wasn't new to you.
it really wasn't new. Like, it really took me a long time to learn.
Uh-huh.
And, and I think that one of the reasons why my work is so grounded in self-compassion is that what I used to do was, if I spotted any kind of weakness in myself, I'd just beat myself up about it. I would call it weakness, rather than calling it, all the many numbers of words that it might be.
Yeah, I mean, what you've just described is probably what a lot of us have been through at some point in our lives.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, who doesn't lay in front of Netflix sometimes, on the sofa as a way of relaxing, turning to alcohol, especially in midlife when, maybe the serotonin receptors aren't as receptive as they once were, and you don't feel as happy and content, and you look for that, don't you? You look for that dopamine high, and you get that
Mm,
from like sweet foods and alcohol, and it's a very easy thing to fall into. But I assume you must have been working really hard as well. Were you
mm.
working like
Yeah, crazy hours.
Ridiculous hours. Yeah.
So I was commuting 4 hours a day, pretty much.
Yeah.
It was almost 2 hours each way. And you know, I mean, oh goodness, like at the period sort of coming up to when everything really fell apart, I had this incredible team. I had a lot of responsibility. I was in charge of a gigantic budget and very high profile role. My team would do things like one of them would walk past my desk at like 8 o'clock at night when they were leaving. So I mean,
Uh-huh.
that's bad enough, you know.
Yeah.
And they'd say, "Are you going home tonight?" And I'd say, "Oh God, yeah, yeah, yeah. I've just got to get this finished." And then they'd reappear and say, "I've booked you a hotel." And I kept a overnight bag in my drawer so that, you know, when that happened, and I think that is really, really telling of two things. Like one, what an incredible um team that I had, that they were looking out for me in that way. Two, what was I doing allowing someone that worked in as part of my team to be in the office at 8 o'clock at night themselves and not questioning that? But also, thirdly, like, how was I attending to my own needs other than the thing that I thought I had to deliver at work? And I know I used to get off the train and just look exhausted. Now, the other thing about all of this, of course, Amanda, is that I also had a really happy life, like wonderful husband, incredible son, lots of really amazing friends, wonderful family. You know, all of these things are all also present. But what wasn't present was my awareness of myself. And I think that is what the work that I offer, that's what it really is about. And that's what all my writing, all my books, the podcasts that I have, all the coaching that I do is really about deepening this self-awareness with this profound self-compassion, and then really understanding, well, what is it that we actually need right now? And it might be to work really hard. It might be that, but do it consciously rather than that kind of mindless um, place that I was in. And that I recognize many of the people that work in any number of environments are often in, that we have this sort of sense that we have to behave in this way. This is what hard work looks like. And actually, I would really challenge that. I don't think
Yeah,
often.
you know, I chat to some lovely women and they tell me the same story. And I mean, I've worked for myself for a long time now. So, you know, I have periods when I'm really busy and I know I'm, you know, overdoing it a bit, but I know it's only for a short period and I can kind of cope with that. But yeah, some women that have confided in me, you know, they've just said that, you know, those deadlines were everything to them, and at the cost of their family, you know, their own health, what they ate, you know, what they did at weekends. It was all about, you know, getting that project in on time, meeting that deadline, whatever it might be. But I wonder
Mm.
what drives us to, and I say to them, you know, when you work like that, you know, there's pressure somewhere. And if you're, you know, it's probably you and you've got this sort of suppressed kind of need for good food and relaxation, and you're just and being calm, and you're pushing all of that down, and that really damages you physically,
So,
you know, and
so often.
psychologically.
Yeah, I mean, so often it comes from these learned patterns of behavior, belief systems, these legacy stories that we've gathered from our family unit that determine what we believe to be okay and what we believe to be not okay. And, you know, you sort of talk about nutrition. I know that's obviously your area of expertise. And for me, one of the really kind of big shifts that I made was I went and spoke with a nutritionist, and it was such a whim of an idea to go, and it was sort of offered up to me, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, like, I'll go and do that. But I held this belief that I understood about food because I'd been vegetarian since I was 20. So I kind of had a sense of, you know, what protein was and, you know, what carbohydrate was. And,
Mhm.
and I thought that we ate pretty well. And one of the questions that she asked me, and it was basically when after the burnout, I ended up taking a sabbatical for 3 months, and that was life changing. And it was one of the things that I did during that time. And she said to me, what do you want? And I don't think I'd ever asked myself that question, not like deeply, like, what do you want? And out of my mouth came, I want to be strong. And she said, okay, let's work on that. And I like the whole time I was talking to her after that, I was thinking, well, what does that even mean? And how does nutrition even relate to that? And the realization was I wanted to be in my body and to be able to trust my body. And I mean, I've done a lot of work on this. It goes back a very, very long way. However, I also recognize that at that time, I was going through medically undiagnosed early menopause, and I was feeling like my body was failing me. And so actually turning my attention toward how I was fueling and nurturing and nourishing my body meant that I started to recreate this connection with what was going on actually inside me, as opposed to just what was happening in my head. And I think for a lot of us, when we get trapped in that, that thing that you were talking about, the kind of the project is everything. We're just like so high up in our heads.
Mhm. Yeah.
We've completely lost sight of everything else. And some part of us genuinely believes it's the most important thing and is terrified, possibly, about what might happen if we don't pay this like high degree of attention. So I think nutrition is vital because it's, you know, I one of the things nutritionists asked me was, how's your digestion? And I literally looked at her and went, what?
Bean. Yeah.
Like, I don't know what. Like, I mean, I poo. I don't know. Like, what does that mean? Like, is that it? Is that what you mean? And um, yeah, I just didn't know what she meant. And now I am so attentive. Like, I really know. I know when cortisol is flooding into my system in the first thing in the morning and it's time to get up. I recognize when, I'm losing attention, and I then notice that my tummy has actually been telling me that for a little bit of time and I need some food. This kind of
Yeah.
awareness of the body, I think, is such an important part of the
Yeah. And
journey.
it's very easy to live up in your head, isn't it? And not be in your body. And of course, it's all part of one system. And living in your head kind of does come at a price. A lot of women are running the home, doing most of the work with the kids, as things are changing. And I hope my daughter's generation will change even further and, make inroads in that way. But, it's still a lot of women that I see that are working full time are still doing most of those things, or the
Mm.
lion's share. So, it's tricky for women not to get burnt out. And of course, in midlife, when your hormones are, you're not quite as robust as you once were because your hormones aren't at the levels, and you're trying to get yourself sorted out, and you don't know what's going on. It's a tough time for women, isn't it?
Mm.
I
And
wonder what your key learnings were from that burnout, Henny,
oh
that you might
gosh,
sort of pass on to other women that might be thinking, gosh, I'm feeling a bit burnt out myself.
I mean,
Big
oh
question.
gosh, again, it's such a big question. I think what it distills down to is learning how to love and care for ourselves. And and that in itself is a gigantic answer, because for so many of us, that's something that we've either been consciously taught not to do, or we've subconsciously learnt it somewhere down the line in our family system, that it's not, it's selfish, or it's weak. That could be another one. Um, that other people always take priority. And I think particularly as women, that's often the story. So, you know, finding tiny little shifts that we can make, or opening doorways into sort of new ways of thinking about things that we can do, but with a stance of, and I'm going to love myself through this. That really is the most profound shift that we can make. And I think, we've sort of touched on menopause a few times, and one of the most important things about all of the menopause conversations that are happening now, even though some of it makes me very uncomfortable because it's become very binary, like you must take HRT, you must never take HRT, these sort of very binary voices that are also very present. Fundamentally, I think the most important thing is that we're raising awareness of what is our own experience, and then hopefully learning not to judge that. So if we're finding something hard, to be able to say, oh, this is hard. This is hard, and I am okay. That for me is the most compassionate stance that we can take. Not trying to suppress the parts of us that are struggling. Just in the past, we might have suppressed the parts of us that are saying, give me love,
I mean, I do wonder, why is it so alien to us as women or human beings? I don't know, I can only experience it as a woman. But to look after ourselves, like you said, it seems selfish, it seems weak, it seems wrong. We should put the needs of others first. And, I don't want to be that sort of, I do see some people like this in you come across them, don't you? But they're a bit self-obsessed at the cost of everyone else. But that's generally not what I see. Most women are putting everybody else first, other than themselves, until they hit a crisis point, like like you did. But yeah, why is it so alien to us?
I mean, without wishing to leap into a sort of semi-political sort of avenue, but there's an aspect here which is the patriarchy, which is, I think in modern, or in recent years at least, whether that means recent decades or the last couple of 100 years, the things that we've valued have become things that we might more assign to perhaps the divine masculine characteristics, rather than the characteristics we might see as being the divine feminine. I'm deliberately using those terms rather than gender, because I don't think it is a gender thing. And so I think, the thing about working long hours, I wore a gigantic badge of honor that said, I am so stressed. I work really long hours. Can anyone see how brilliant I am? Look at how much I have on my plate. I really thought that was something to be admired. Now, I would say that is something which kind of comes through a workplace which is not celebrating the caring, nurturing aspects of the divine feminine type role. And I think that for a lot of men, they really struggle with this as well. There's this kind of absolute sort of belief they might hold that as a man, they've got no choice here. And I think often as women, when we're in that kind of workplace, certainly in the past, there's been this belief that we have to show up in the way that we see our peers. And if our peers are mostly men, we're going to kind of mimic them. Like that's a human nature to do that. And so therefore these nurturing, caring skills don't get celebrated in the same way, or haven't traditionally been celebrated in the same way. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of history around why we do it. And I think it's all really understandable. I don't think, I don't subscribe to conspiracy theories of, I can understand, some of those like feminine traits may have been subsumed out of fear. You look at like I mean, God, we're going like wow, really into it. But you know, when you look at like what happened with like the witch trials and like women being
Yeah.
suppressed because they were wise and they understood things that, you know, weren't understood by others, you know, you can see that it comes from a place of fear. And fear is a really human response to something. So we don't condone the behavior, but we can understand where it comes from. And I think the same thing applies to self-care, that it's like for some reason in many of our systems, our family systems, that practice of looking after ourselves hasn't been rewarded because there's a belief that it's not right.
No. And I think being that busy, it's almost, it feeds the ego, doesn't it? I'm so busy, I'm in demand, I'm rushing around. Yeah, it's all ego feeding, which we know ultimately isn't where and there's any peace or calm or
Mm.
stability. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've all done it. I've done it. It's like rushing around, and now I really try and stop myself. If someone says, "How are you?" Oh, I'm so busy. Really try not to say that. Sometimes I'll say it's been a bit of a hectic week, but that's as close as I'll go because it's just like, I do not want to, continue that kind of being busy is a badge of honor. As a nutritionist, I look at people like that and I just think burnout. You are
Yeah.
the cost of you being this busy is your physical and psychological health.
And digestion won't work as
What
well.
exactly?
And,
Yeah, yeah,
you know, you're
yeah.
not
The
getting the
vagus
nutritional
nerve,
value. Yeah.
none of it works optimally and suddenly. And by the time see people, they've been doing that for a long time. Not their fault. We've all been there, and we get different pieces of information, don't we, that we sit up and listen to and think, oh, I chime with that, and we change. But of course, I've been a nutritionist for 13 years now, so looking after yourself has been really important to me, that I practice what I preach, but I can see how easy it is to fall into that and to try and step off that, that hamster wheel and start
Oh,
taking care of yourself. Some people need, a crisis like you did, which is, oh
yeah.
my God, you had the biggest message ever, didn't you? That you had to do something different.
And also, you know, it's when we recognize that there are these like macro conditions that might be driving our cultural beliefs that we've picked up in our family system, for example, or in our cultural system. And there are these like day-to-day practices where you see other people get rewarded for working hard. You know, you'd be a fool not to sort of recognize that and go like,
Yes, yeah, of
oh, I
course,
might
yeah.
get like praise if I work hard. You know,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's being smart in many ways. It's like we love praise as human beings. Um, but it's the so when you see that there are both of these conditions at play, it's so easy to understand why it's so hard for people to change because academically, literally, we all know if I eat well, I feel better. If I move more, I feel better. If I rest well, I feel better. Like we know all of this. And yet it's these core beliefs, you know, that might be things like if I if I do something for me, others might judge me. If I listen to my inner voice, I might get rejected by my community. You know, these are really fundamental beliefs about belonging, security, love, and and so it stops being about why are you working so hard, and and then it drills down and down to
Yeah, it's much
who
bigger, isn't
are
it?
you?
Yeah.
I mean, who am I?
Yeah, and a lot of people would say, well, I can't stop working 12 hours a day because that's what the job requires. And if I don't stay on top of it, so this is, what I hear and I completely understand. If I don't stay on top of it, I get even more stress. So therefore, I work in the evenings and I work some weekends to keep a pace with it. And then if the environment in the office is the same and everyone's doing that, it's really difficult, isn't it, to
It is.
stick your head above the parapet and say, I'm doing something different.
Well, and that's so I very mindfully went back to the big organization where I worked and I stayed there for another 2 years and I used those 2 years as a playground. I used them as a way of very kindly, mindfully pushing up against some of these belief systems that I'd established within myself, some of these rules that I noticed were in there, and I actively changed my behaviors in as an to experiment. Well, like, okay, does this rule actually exist? So one of the ones was, as a result of my menopause, I was really losing cognitive function, hence thinking I was going mad. I couldn't remember words. I was losing, my train of thought mid-sentence. I mean, literally just stopping. It's very common.
I hear this from a lot of women, yeah.
And nutrition played a big part actually for me in helping restore that function. But I'm still left with it. I still occasionally will just go, "Ugh, literally, I have no idea where I'm going." But one of the things was my job involved lots of presentations, and I held a rule inside me that you couldn't do a presentation with notes because it looked unprofessional. That was a rule. And so as I realized, I was like literally incapable of doing a presentation without notes. I had two choices: either get over that or never get on a stage again. So I got over it. And I would go onto the stage and I would quite often say, I'm menopausal, can't remember one word to the next. So I have my notes just to make sure I actually tell you what you need to know. And I would just front it out because that was part of my playing with my, like, the stuff that I found uncomfortable. I'm not recommending everybody does that, but it was worked for me. And, so these things about actually what I found was so much of what I had seen as being constraints around me were the constraints that I was creating.
Yourself. Yeah, it's so true. So, I mean, maybe we'll come to this later, but I'm looking at my other things we're going to talk about. But what would be your advice to anyone who's in this loop? Because it's incredibly common, to help them sort of take that step out, maybe, of that circle and think, okay, I need to do things slightly differently. I need to prioritize myself. What advice would you give them, Henny?
So it's a beautiful question. I think the first thing is notice. Like, really notice without trying to fix and without trying to change. Because without awareness, we're at risk of making a load of assumptions or judgments or preconceptions about what might be most useful for us going forward. So, and I would journal. I mean, that would really be, that's the thing that saved me, I would say. I mean, I did lots of practices, but that's been the most consistent one. And so write about what you're noticing. And as you're writing, don't worry about grammar and spelling and making any sense. Like, just write. And if you're noticing that there's judgment coming in, or the inner critic you mentioned earlier, then a really simple sentence to use is, how can I bring more compassion here? And literally write those words. So the minute you notice,
I bring more compassion here.
how can I bring more compassion here?
Yeah.
And then just see what how your pen responds, and it might say, I can't. And that's okay. Like, it's okay. Or it might say, oh, I could take a breath. Okay, I'll take a breath. And this kind of journaling is really about stream of consciousness, where what happens is you can't write as fast as your brain thinks. So you're slowing down your thoughts to such a degree that there's a little bit of spaciousness comes in. So notice. That would be my first thing, is pay attention to what's coming up. And then once you can see what's coming up, then you can make a choice from there to see, well, what is going to most serve me now? And maybe it's coming and working with someone like you. Maybe it's coming and working with someone like me. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's cold water showers. Maybe it's making sure that once a day you get 5 minutes outside breathing, something that brings a little bit more space. And I think like often what we do is we have this kind of sense, particularly when we listen to someone who's had an experience like me, it's so dramatic. And then I made these massive changes. But I made these massive changes over a really long period of time. It was like I didn't suddenly, like it took me 4 years to
You
decide to stop
evolved.
drinking. Yeah, I evolved, and that's the thing. I think it's was it Mark Twain who said it takes many months to write an impromptu speech. It's this idea
Yeah.
that like we have this sort of sense of like, well, you've done it, it's really easy for you because you've been able to do it, ergo it must have been easy. But every single person who makes any change in their life, they begin with saying, oh, what is it that I need right now? What am I noticing? What do I need?
Yeah. And
How can I move
that
towards
sounds
it?
so brilliant, Henny. And I have your lovely book In the Flow, which is all about journaling, and I've read it, and I thought, and I think every week I'm going to journal. I'm going to journal next week. I'm going to journal next week, and here I am. How long have we been talking? And I still haven't done any journaling. Now I do write in a diary every night, and but there's really only enough room for sort of 5 or 6 sentences, so it's quite dry. It's just what I've done, but it's really handy because you can go back and see what you've done. But yeah, I come up against this brick wall, and I have journaled in the past when I've had issues, but I haven't journaled for years now, and I can't break through, and I keep saying I'm going to do it, and then I never do it, and occasionally when I put in my diary and I've gone a little bit into my feelings, and like I said, there's not a lot of space in this little diary that I have, but you sort of do feel like a sense of, I don't know, something, whether it's relief or release or I don't know, but there definitely is something, isn't there, about
Mm.
putting pen to paper. So yeah, what would you say is the sort of power of journaling? What can I need, I need maybe people that are listening, the lovely listeners also that, we all like the idea of journaling. It's just making it a habit, doing it, and also it's making yourself quite vulnerable, isn't it? I always think, oh my God, if I write that down, Henny, what if someone reads it? Oh my God, that would be a disaster. I don't want people knowing what's in my head. I mean, do you write and then screw it up and throw it away? I mean, what's the sort of, yeah, can you give us some
Well,
advice on just getting going and
yeah.
overcoming that kind of resistance?
So yes, I can. First of all, and secondly, I just want to call out there was a core belief that just came through in what you said. You said I just can't break through. So I want to just challenge you very gently, very kindly. Um, to what degree is that statement true?
Yeah. I'm often like this. I need sort of like, a trigger to get me
Mm.
started.
So the
I
thing,
suppose it makes me feel vulnerable.
ah, beautiful. There we go. So maybe a truer way of saying, I just can't break through is uh this makes me feel vulnerable. And so I'm avoiding it or whatever the thing is. Now, within that, this makes me feel vulnerable. It sounds like there's another belief. And if you and I were working together, rather than, in public, I would perhaps explore that. But something about the vulnerability can be, there could be a belief that it's like, for me to do this means I have to be so vulnerable. It's going to be so exposing. And that just feels terrifying for me. And maybe like a little part that's kind of sitting in there going, I don't know what's going to happen. And so what I would do is journal about that. So the very first prompt in the book is as I pick up my pen, I am noticing. And it's the most open, expansive prompt. And so it may be that as you pick up your pen and you follow on from that prompt, the words are, I really don't know why I'm doing this. I'm feeling deeply uncomfortable. I don't think I even like journaling. Why on earth would I be sitting here writing in this silly book anyway? Like let it out onto the page. And then maybe ask yourself, okay, so right, so what is going on here? I mean, literally write the words. So what is going on here that's provoking this response from me? And if you chose to, you can tear that page out of the book and burn it because there are no rules, Amanda. And I think that is, in some ways, it kind of makes this practice very scary because often what we're looking for is absolutes. Whereas this practice of flow journaling, the thing that has become like clearer and clearer for me over the last few years has been it's the openness that makes it such a valuable practice, such a valuable tool. And sometimes what I will do when I'm sensing there's something deeply vulnerable coming up, I'll ask the journal about it. And so rather than me exposing my deepest fears or my like think something that kind of feels like almost impossible for me to even say out loud, I might say to the journal, what is it that I need to understand right now? And just see what comes. And maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's maybe it's gibberish. That's all right. Doesn't matter because there are no rules. We're not journaling for an outcome. We're simply journaling. So I think it's the most expansive thing. It's like it's allowing ourselves to be as free as many of us say we want to be.
Yeah, yeah. No, when I when I said, I just can't overcome the whatever's stopping me, and I'm thinking as you're talking, it makes me feel vulnerable. And you know that being open and vulnerable with friends or safe people, not everybody, but people that you consider to be safe in their company and that you trust, it's the one thing that, connects people, isn't it? Just being don't want to use the word authentic because it's so overused, isn't it? But your real sort of core self. And that's when you make the deepest connections with other human beings, isn't it? But yeah, and I suppose also, for me, it's just like, oh my goodness, there's certain things I keep private, and just suddenly being open about that on a page, even though no one else is going to read it, just feels like, yeah, feels a bit scary.
And yet it's everything that you write. So one of the things that I think I talk about in this book. There's another book coming, so it might be in that one. But one of the things that I talk about is that this state of psychological safety. So when we're feeling really worried about what might happen if we show up on the page, one of the steps that we can do is kind of reassure ourselves about our psychological safety. And part of that is remembering that we'll only write what we feel okay to write. No one else is holding that pen. And and often what I find is that I go back to my journal and I'll remember. So I don't date things, but I kind of have a sense of like when each journal was written in. And I'll know, oh, I was going through a big thing there. And I'll see it's kind of oblique. Like, but I remember the feeling of writing it felt, maybe very vulnerable. But when I reread it now, I see this, it's very oblique because the meaning of the experience was what was vulnerable, not the actual words I was writing on the page, if that makes sense.
It does, totally. And I suppose that once you're writing it down, you're allowing it kind of, I mean, you talk about flow journaling. I don't know exactly what that means, but I was just thinking then of the word flow. Like when you write it down, it's like it's coming out of you. Like there's a flow from, your consciousness onto the page.
Exactly that. Exactly that. And it feels like a state of flow. So,
Is that
uh,
what it means, flow journaling then?
yeah, it's really about allowing I mean, I suppose in its simplest form, it's allowing the words to flow and trusting that what comes up is is what um is what is needed right now. So rather than specifically using a practice like gratitude journaling, which is also a really beautiful practice. Um, so I went through several years where I wrote 21 things I was grateful for every single night. I actually had a Instagram account called 21 Beads of Gratitude.
Mhm.
And it was a an experiment for myself. Like, what impact is this going to have on me? Now, that is a very, very different technique because that's actively thinking about what am I grateful for. With flow journaling, we're taking a compassion based prompt, open ended, very expansive, compassion based prompt, and we're simply saying, what is my response? And when those voices of, well, I don't know what to write, or what if someone sees this, or oh, I made a mistake, or is that really what I meant to say? When those voices come up, we allow them. Maybe we write what they're saying, and then we see what the response is on the page. And it can sound a bit bonkers because it's the journal is an inanimate object, and yet the experience we're having is anything but inanimate. Like, we're conversing with ourselves in a way that most of us have denied ourselves from doing. In a way, it almost sort of there's a kind of free child aspect to it from like transactional analysis, if anyone's sort of looked at that. This sense of like the willingness to express ourselves in the way that a child that is just, you know, dancing
Give it a
around in a,
second thought to express
yeah,
themselves, just as they
exactly.
are. Yeah,
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 just this is the thought. This is what I think. Oh no,
yeah,
this is what I think. And it's like it all
yeah.
unfolds.
Whereas
So
we've been conditioned, so we're constantly screening and yeah,
yeah. And to
filtering.
edit ourselves, we're told, one of the things I write about in the book is there was a teacher at my school, Mrs. Back, who was terrifying, brilliant teacher, utterly terrifying. And I have had to unlearn her voice from my head and allow myself to discover the way that I write. And we will all have some people's voices, maybe our inner voices in our heads. And so part of this process is going, oh, okay, well, that's here. That's okay.
And so I suppose if we talk about the inner critic, but if you're journaling, does that in a way challenge the inner critic? Do you think if you write things down and you read it and you think, well, no, that's not right, that's an assumption. Where's the evidence for that? Is it a bit like that, or
So you may do that. I would say it's less about challenge and more about embracing.
okay? I don't know what that's saying about me.
Well, but I think but so much of the rhetoric around inner critic or the ego, the sort of language of like, we need to kill the ego. I mean, like, to me, that breaks my heart. Like, my whole system just, oh gosh, no, like that's not the way forward for me. The way forward is actually to really embrace those parts of us. So, if the inner critic is there going like, why are you writing that? This is just really stupid. To turn toward it and go, oh my darling, okay, so what's going on there? What are you afraid of? What's the fear? And that can be where journaling takes us into some very deep places, because we can actually have this holding even those really challenging voices with the utmost love and compassion. um and I think that's a big part of the work that I do as a coach as well. As a therapeutic coach, it's really enabling people to make space for the whole of themselves rather than shunning the parts of us that we don't like the look of. That's it's not really going to serve
Yeah.
us ultimately.
Yeah. No. And you do hear some coaches saying, people have their morning routines, don't they? And journaling is part of that. Is that something? I mean, obviously, the power of journaling in your mind is that it exposes parts of you that perhaps you don't pay any attention to. I mean, I'm putting words into your mouth here, but just
Mm.
from what you've said, discovering yourself, understanding, you said earlier, noticing what you need, um, you know, so yeah, for you, would you say the power of journaling is just getting to know yourself a bit better and understanding what's going on with your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think in its simplest form, yes.
Yeah.
So it helps me that there's a famous quote, and I can't remember who it was who said it, which isn't very helpful, but it's um in my journal, I discover what I think. And that I think is essentially what it is. There's also a beautiful Walt Whitman quote, which is be curious, not judgmental. And and I think the place of the journal is a place of curiosity. And in internal family systems or parts work, which is one of the I practice parts work. Um, one of the stance points is that within us we have this wise inner self with a capital S, and essentially through the practice of flow journaling, and it might not happen straight away, and that's okay, because like nothing does happen straight away, we all move toward things, but as we deepen our attention, our affection for the journal and for the practice, this wise kind inner voice is given more scope to speak, and it enables us to access our curiosity without judgment, and to notice when judgment is creeping in and to be curious about that rather than judgmental about it, because that's the other thing we often do is go, oh, I shouldn't be thinking that, and it's like, well, you are, so
Yeah.
um and to, yes, to sort of allow ourselves to see, well, what do I think about this thing? Oh, okay, maybe I think other things as well as that.
So it's quite revealing,
Very.
and 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 also I'm picking up that it's just, as I said earlier, some people say they do this in meditation, they kind of connect with their inner self, which sounds a bit woo-woo, but if you're never on your own, you're constantly distracted, be it work, family, whatever, you almost can't sort of you can't connect with your thoughts. Even you don't even know what you do think, what your opinion is. And I've often noticed this for myself. I do need a certain amount of time on my own to know what I actually want. And maybe journaling is like another level, a certain deeper level. Do you think people would, yeah, benefit from journaling for that reason?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most of us are a blend of introvert and extrovert. Anything that is like super binary, I struggle with. I like operating in the gray,
Mhm.
and so I think most of us have some balance of this. Like, I need the company of people, and I don't need the company of people. Like, and so,
I find that more in midlife. I used to have people around me, 24/7. you know, couldn't bear to have a weekend where, you weren't doing anything. And now I love company, and I love connecting with other people. But I also recognize that sometimes I just want to be on my own, maybe with the dog. She doesn't take up too much bandwidth, but it's kind of like I just need that time down, where I'm just sort of, yeah, I don't know, not being myself. I don't know, just being on my own.
mm,
It shifts me, and it kind of, I'd say I'm an extrovert, but obviously there's part of me that the little introvert part of me does need a bit more downtime these days. And
and often that part gets ignored, particularly if we hold a story that we're an extrovert, or we've been told
yes,
we're an extrovert. So
yes.
when I was a little girl, ta-da, on the stage, always the one who put a hand up, used to go and do, like, uh, oh God, talent shows, all of those sorts of things. But actually, I recognize I'm really quite introverted. I'm extremely confident, but I'm an introvert in the sense that I have an absolute need for space, for peace, for my own company in order to work out what I need, like, and what I
Yeah.
feel. And also in order for me to be able to show up and be brilliant with others. Like I want to give people my energy, but not in a draining way. I'd like to make sure that I'm sustained and that I can show up with them. And part of what journaling can do, and actually I think this is a really lovely practical aspect, is once we establish a habit, a practice, like journaling in the morning or in the evening or when you get home from work or whatever, is you can start to train the people around you, and I'm using that word very advisedly, that this is your time. And it could be 10 minutes. It could be 10 minutes where you get a cup of tea and you curl up in a corner on some cushions and you just get your journal, or maybe you put some nice music on that you like and you write. And you can start to educate those around you that, like, oh no, this is mum's time or dad's time or my sister or my child's time, like whatever it is, and at any age, I think, as well. And we start to train ourselves in a kind of Pavlovian way that this is a safe space. So when you first start writing, maybe the stuff feels more surface level because like that's what's available. That's what feels okay. The longer you do it, maybe there are, cues that you pick up on that tell you, oh, actually, this is a safe space. Like my whole body can start to relax, release a bit of oxytocin into my system,
And so someone like me, I mean, I'd like to do everything. I'd like to meditate. I like to do breathing, visualizing. I'd like to journal, even though I'm a little bit scared of it. I like the idea of having that as part of my sort of self-care practice. But we're also busy, and life is busier, and it's busier because we're all spending more time on screens and social media. I mean, that's reality. That's what's making us all so much busier. So we feel busier, but the reality is we don't have to spend, I think the average is 3.5 4 hours on a phone a day. We don't have to do that, but in our mind we feel we've got the busy badge.
Mm.
um, any advice you could give us that would just say, okay, just to get us started, and do we need to journal every day, or can it be twice a week, once a week? What to actually really get these positive benefits that you're talking about, and
Mm.
connecting with ourselves, and processing maybe information that isn't sitting well with us. How often do we need to do it, and how can
Okay.
we start?
So I think there's in terms of how often we do it, there are some really lovely principles around forming habits. And I would recommend that initially that you do look to do it more regularly. So, and that could be every day, or maybe it's every other day, but sort of set some kind of barometer that you can check yourself against. So, and don't beat yourself up if you don't do it. Really important. Be compassionate because things, can get in the way.
It's that fine line, though, isn't it? We're being too compassionate for doing anything.
Well,
And
so I would suggest that that stops being compassion and maybe starts being distraction. So then notice what is getting in the way. Be compassionate about that, but ask yourself, okay, so is, I said to you, do you want to do it? And you said, I just don't want to do it. And I said, then don't do it because there's no rule. So if it's genuinely, I don't want to do it, then that's okay. But the question can then be like, is that
I'm curious
true?
then.
Yeah, exactly. So if
Um,
you are curious, okay, so how can I make space for this? And James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, is really helpful for habit changing, habit forming. But one of the things that I would recommend is you get a journal that you like to write in, a nice bit of stationery that's
well,
always
who
useful.
doesn't like a nice bit of stationery?
Who doesn't like it? A really lovely pen that you like to write with. And then only write one page. No more, no less, just one page. And when you get to the end of the page, you put your full stop. I do thank you and 3 kisses because that's kind of where it's got to. And now I realize I'm drawing hearts on it as well. But anyway, but I get to the end of the page, shut the book. That's it. So to actually write a page of A5 will take you 5 minutes, 6 minutes maybe. So experiment with that. And, if you get a bus regularly or you have a cup of tea in the morning sitting at the kitchen table, or wherever you have a space in your life, you'll know there are these little windows.
Mm-hmm.
Just think, okay, I'm going to see how it is to journal in that time. And the experiment becomes, I'm going to see how it is, rather than I must journal. This is a very important thing. And I'm struggling with it, so we're not kind of into all the resistance to it, but just the play with it.
Yes, that's so it with me. I'm like, oh my God, I've got a journal. I need an hour.
Yes, exactly. I need an hour.
And I
It
need to
must be
be sat
meaningful.
somewhere on my own, pages
Yeah.
and pages. And yeah, that's probably where I'm
Yes.
going wrong.
Yeah, and it's just not that. The practice, it's a bit like meditation, I think. So the practice of meditation is not that you must sit on a cushion in, a perfect posture, chanting Om with an empty mind. Like that is not meditation. Meditation or mindfulness is noticing that your mind's wandered, which it will do every few seconds or every second or multiple times during a second if you're anything like any other human being. And so the practice of mindfulness is to go, oh, thinking, I'm back. The practice, it's not about, you don't meditate to get to an outcome. And the same with the journal, you're simply writing. And when we use these compassion-based prompts, it helps our writing flow in a particular way. And something interesting might fall onto the page. I promise you, Amanda, some of the entries in my journals, which I'm pointing like over here, some of the entries literally make no sense. Some of them are written with like huge handwriting because I'm like dealing with some big emotions. Some of them are written with these like tiny, tiny little handwriting because I'm like deeply, deeply focused on the thing that's going through my head. It's all utterly valid. None of it is better or worse. The ones that turn into poetry that I then publish in my books are exactly as valid as the ones that I genuinely would never show anybody because they are so private and so nonsensical that, they would hold no meaning to anybody else. It's all valid.
Mm-hmm.
And we are so taught to judge and to put things into hierarchies and to label and to validate and to add criteria. And I think that is not what this practice is about.
No. You've obviously been journaling for quite a long time.
Well, only since since 2016.
Yeah. Well,
So
8
yeah, so
years, quite a long time. What have you found personally? How has it helped you, Henny?
oh my goodness
Just
me.
the headlines, but just
Oh,
obviously a
I
lot.
think it helped me fall in love with myself. That's it. And I can, without irony or embarrassment, categorically say, I deeply love myself. I mean, with so much warmth. And it gives me so much joy to be able to say that. And 10 years ago, I'd have I'd have laughed in my own face if I'd heard myself say that. I mean, it really has. Like I see that inside me is this rich, rich source of wisdom. And I see that inside every single person on this planet is a rich, rich source of wisdom. It it doesn't mean we always tap into it. And many of us, I mean, there's so much chaos unfolding around us in the world. And I think there always is. And many people, for whatever reason, don't understand that this space of compassionate wisdom is inside them, or don't choose to access it. And and that is what it is. But I believe it's there for all of us.
Yeah, that's really something, isn't it? So many people, myself included, would struggle to say that. And we should. And we all know that if you don't love yourself, you can't radiate love out to other people, can you? It's just, and when someone's really mean to you or mean to other people, it's often you nearly 100% of the time, it's about them, isn't it? Rather than the person that they've maybe insulted or haven't treated very well. So that's just sort of so key, really, to being human, isn't it? Oh, that's brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing all that. And I kind of had a couple of other questions about, women losing confidence in midlife and, what they might do. And I think you've kind of already answered that, really. They should journal and just discover themselves.
Meet themselves on the pages of their journal, because if we cannot be safe with ourselves, then where can we be safe?
Yeah, absolutely. Once I was giving a talk at a retreat and there was this wedding celebrant. And I gave my talk and then we sat down chatting. She was a really lovely lady and she travels all over the world. And she says, she was telling us that she'd got divorced. She'd come out with very little sort of material wealth. So she only had a few things. And she kind of, she was getting herself, more established, but she moved around a lot and she'd stopped placing so much value on things. But she said she was her home. She was her home. And that's what she learned from this whole experience, that she was safe in herself, and that's she came back to herself. She was safe, and it's yeah. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I remember writing it down. It's like, you are your home, and so many of us don't think that. We think it's something out there that someone else has created.
There's a Ram Dass quote, which is, we're all walking each other home. That sense that that's really, and that's why it sort of goes back to, this hearts work that I talked about, this sense of like making space for the whole of us. Like every single part of us is worthy of our attention, even the parts that we may have shunned or been told aren't nice to look at, or the parts of us that feel emotions that are complicated and strange, like those things, even those parts, like they're all deserving of our love. It doesn't mean that that we then are so subsumed by them, but that we're then driven by them, and we have to act on the thoughts that these sort of complicated parts might have. But what it does mean is that we can show them the love that the whole of us deserves. And actually, just through that practice, it is astonishing the transformation that can take place within. And we began this conversation, you talked about dopamine hits, and like how we kind of feel like we're tending to ourselves, when actually often what we're doing is we're just creating distractions. But actually, when we can sit, and I'm not saying this is easy at all, by the way, but when we can sit in a space where, like, okay, the whole of me is welcome here. A whole system, you talked about the vagus nerve, a whole system settles. Everything settles. I mean, even just sort of saying it, like I'm literally feeling the most delicious feeling going through my body, because, isn't that something that we all would say we want?
Absolutely. I mean, the title of this podcast, How to Feel Like a Midlife Goddess, is, you just realize, don't you, as you get into midlife, that it is about how you feel. And if you think back to times when you're really happy, really connected, oh my goodness, that is such a wonderful feeling, much better than, buying something meeting that deadline, you know, all the other things that we associate with a bit of a dopamine hit. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's because it's just so deep and profound, isn't it? And it's something
So
that a lot
deep.
of us don't pay attention to. One
Yeah.
thing I just wanted to ask you, I mean, you know, to all the lovely listeners that, you know, a lot of them I know quite well, but when I met you, I mean, I didn't really know you until we had this chat today. We've had a few brief conversations, haven't we? But you do seem, and you said it yourself, you know, you do come across like a really wise woman and someone I'd really like to go to when I had a problem. And something that, you know, a lot of women that I am lucky enough to be in contact with through the clinic and personally, you know, we're all losing parents, dealing with grief. It's that kind of age, isn't it? Sort of, you know, 40s, 50s, 60s, when, you know, you start losing parents. And yeah, do you have any, I sort of don't want to make this too vague, but, you know, any recommendations that helps, you know, would help us sort of deal with grief? And, you know, because we kind of have to accept that these people have now gone, and it's just that transition of, you know, like suddenly they've gone, you know, you're now the matriarch. You know, it's quite a shift for a lot of us, isn't it?
Mm.
And yeah, I just wondered if you had any advice around grief and, you know, how we
Gosh.
kind of go, you know, yeah, I don't want to, obviously, I know you're not a grief expert, but it's just, it's something that comes up a lot in, you know, when I'm talking to people, to women,
So
and
I
some of
would
us just
say,
suppress it. And I'm wondering if
yeah.
journaling is another good way of helping us express it and
Absolutely. Absolutely.
acceptance.
And in fact, Amanda, what I was going to say was I think this is a whole other episode of the podcast, and I would be delighted to come and talk about grief because it is an area I work in a lot.
Really, oh, that would be, I'm going to take you up on
Yeah.
that, Henny, because I get
Yeah.
asked about it so much, and a lot of, you know, a lot of us struggle with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because the thing is, what grief is essentially an unasked for change, you know, and any change, particularly those that are landed upon us, can be incredibly challenging. And and so not only are we dealing with a, you know, a sort of, you know, a kind of shift in our family dynamic, you know, like, and also our place in the hierarchy, because that's the only place there is a hierarchy, is who came first. So there's a place in that sort of the family system that shifts. But we're also dealing with these questions of like, well, what was my relationship with that person? Was I able to express that? um, what was their relationship with me? Was I able to hear when they expressed it, or were they able to express it? So there can be so many layers to um, that we're trying to make sense of. And I think often, you know, often what happens is also we feel that we aren't allowed to talk about it, you know, beyond the kind of first 3 weeks or something like that. It's almost like there's this unwritten, you
so
know,
true. Yeah,
period
that's
of
so true. It's like,
grieving.
we've done that now. Let's move on.
Uh,
That's negative.
and what it is, it's so often what it is that our pain is so hard for the people who love us that they have to reject our pain because they can't bear it in themselves. They can't bear the feeling of our pain in themselves. And this to me speaks to why it is beneficial for literally everybody to do this kind of deep work, this deep self reflective work, because the more we're able to hold space for our own feelings, our own experiences without shunning them, the more able we are to not get completely overwhelmed when someone else is feeling something difficult. You know, those kind of like the mirror neurons and the empathy, um, it can be incredibly difficult for people to manage. So recognizing that can be really useful, like recognizing that our pain is hard for others to carry, and being able to find one person who we can speak with, who will just listen without trying to fix. Really important. We're not asking for someone to fix us. And also to recognize that there is room inside all of us for our pain and for our magnificence. They don't cancel each other out. So you can be magnificent and you can feel the pain at the loss of a parent. And you can feel the loss of a parent and be magnificent. You know, it's like these two things, they can sit side by side. And I think that that is really important, because I think what I did when my mother died is I thought I was managing it brilliantly, by the way, because I was very thoughtful. I was very reflective. I was able to speak about it. Now, what I recognized I was doing was putting a massive veil over my actual feelings, and I was masquerading as someone who was really sorted about it. And it was a defensive strategy, and it's a very well-worn strategy, rather than being able to say, the truth of actually what I was experiencing. Um, and and what is threaded through all of this is being able to admit to ourselves what we're experiencing, being able to accept it, allow it, and understand that we're not going to cry forever. So if we find ourselves literally sobbing on the floor, like, it will go on as long as it goes on for. Don't try and stop it, because you're not going to be there next year. Like, you're not literally still going to be lying on that floor. Something will shift. And to your point about the journal can be such a beautiful place for that kind of reflection. Remembering that line that I said earlier, which is, how can I bring more compassion here? And maybe you just write that line. Maybe you just keep writing it again and again and again. you know. So that was quite a long response, but
No, that was brilliant. And you've kind of given, yeah, it talks to my experience so much, and I'm sure it'll speak to others. But just the point, I remember when my mum actually died, and that Hamish said, I think you need to come away now, and we need to go, you need to come and get a shower, and just be on your own for a bit. And I'd been with my mum the whole night, and I cried. It was such a deep, um, yeah, just a deep pain in my chest. And the crying was really profound. And, when your tears are so hot, like when you're a child, you have that kind of, and it went on and on and on. And I was thinking, oh my God, you do think it's going to go on forever, don't you? And just hearing that, it doesn't go on forever. Like, all feelings are transitory, aren't they? And then also having that kind of cognitive dissonance where, you're sobbing. My brother and I were just like so upset. It was very sudden with my mum. And then, 2 hours later, laughing about something. It's just a weird thing. And you think, I should be crying now, or I
yes.
should be, doing this. And I remember my mum's funeral. Uh, you know, I did the eulogy, which I was dreading. It was the hardest sort of public thing I've done. And I don't normally mind public speaking, but that was hard. Anyway, did that. And there was a sense of relief that that was done. And people enjoyed hearing about her life. So that was lovely. But then at the wake, which, was just, both my brother and I enjoyed it so much. We didn't want it to end because people were keeping her alive. They were telling us stories, and, there was suddenly, all these people together. And it was actually really beautiful. And then when they went, it was like,
Mm,
gone again. It's a,
mm,
it's just a roller coaster, isn't it? And yeah, and I hear this from a lot of women. Yeah, we kind of come together and share our experiences, but it's just quite profound, isn't it, losing a
mm,
parent? But oh, that was
yeah.
brilliant what you said. Thank you so much. It's just, yeah, really. I think that will really speak to a lot of people, and I would, like I said, love to do a whole
Mm,
podcast on grief, because I think so many people would benefit from that. But I'm very aware we're well over time, and you've been very generous with your time. So thank you, Henny. And the whole conversation has been so brilliant. But if people want to work with you, now you've got your lovely book in the flow, and I think that's really useful for anybody who wants to start journaling. Lots of these prompts and the things that you talked about today. But if they wanted to work with you, I know you do one-on-one sessions and retreats. Could you just
yeah.
tell us how we can find you?
So I work with people one to one. And if someone is drawn to explore what this work might look like with me for them, then I offer an hour conversation, and it's free, and there's no demands placed on anybody. It's really about understanding whether we are a good fit together and if I'm the right person for them to be working with. And if I don't believe I am, then I'll recommend another sort of pathway. And if we are, then there are a number of sort of ways that people can work with me, depending on kind of where they're at, really, whether they're ready for that like really deep work, or they're just starting to explore something, or for example, if someone has experienced grief recently, it may be that that deep work isn't quite right for them, but we can do some work that really supports them now. So there's that. And then the other sort of really beautiful thing that we do, which is just so exciting, is we have a gorgeous retreat space in our land. I live in Herefordshire.
I've seen your website. It does look, gorgeous,
It
nourishing.
is, yeah, all those words, all those words. And people can come. So people who work with me can come, they stay. It's always just during the week, Tuesday to Friday. My husband is an incredible cook. We provide all the food. We care so gently, so tenderly. You have space, your own beautiful space to be in, and the views are spectacular. But the really important thing is that you have this time on your own, this peacefulness on your own. And I think this land is magic. I mean, that's like, it just is.
You're in Herefordshire, is it?
Herefordshire, yeah, almost on the Welsh border. Also, then there's this opportunity to work with me. Now, for some people, that might be just a few hours while they're here over the week. For others, it might be they really want to kind of like dive in which case we'd be together, not like every minute because you need space and rest, but we would do something a bit more intensive. And then the other thing I do is very occasionally I run very small retreats just with 4 guests and 2 practitioners, and they are divine, absolutely beautiful. We've got one coming up in November, which I'm really, really looking forward to. Again, a whole week, Monday to Friday, whole week, deep rest, deep work. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Well, if you're thinking of that, anybody, I will leave the links to Henny's website and her retreats. I'd quite like to go on one myself.
Oh, that would be amazing, Amanda. You'd absolutely love it.
I think I would. I think I would. Anyway, Henny, thank you so much. Really grateful for your time, and I'm sure that conversation is going to resonate with a lot of people. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda. I didn't realize before I came into the call with you how incredibly wide-ranging our conversation was going to be. And I love that. I love it when there's no constraints. And we're just like, we have gone from, the witch trials through to everything beyond. It's beautiful. So thank you so much. It's lovely.
If you'd like to find out more about my approach, you can find me and lots of my simple, nutritious recipes demonstrated on Instagram at Amanda Ryder Nutrition, and that's Ryder with a Y. Or you can visit my website, www.amandaryder.co.uk. Or if you like a copy of my book, Feel Good for Menopause, you can find that on Amazon. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could like, follow, or click the subscribe button. It will really help me grow the podcast and keep me going. So thank you. And of course, do get in touch. I'd always love to hear from you. So that leaves me to say I'm sending lots of love and light from my midlife goddess to yours. See you next week. Bye for now.